Good evening. My name is Dr. John Winkler, and I am a member of the Wheeling Symphony, and I've been playing principal trumpet for about 35 or 36 years with that organization. And they've been wonderful years, and I joined the orchestra shortly after I started my job teaching at West Virginia University as their trumpet professor. I came there in 1982 and joined the symphony a couple of years later after playing an audition, which is something similar to what we're talking about today. But I recently retired from West Virginia University. I'm still teaching at Duquesne part-time with my son Chad, who is a member of the Pittsburgh Symphony, and we enjoy team teaching some of the folks up there. But today I'm anxious to talk with you because I understand that since you're watching this video, you're probably preparing to play the all-state auditions here in West Virginia. And I've had the privilege of being part of the auditioning committee for all states in past years. And with my work at the university, I've heard lots and lots and lots of auditions for that, for the National Trumpet Competition. And so I'm pretty good at being a judge of good trumpet playing and of what the right parameters ought to be. And so the first thing I want to do today is talk about some of those parameters, things that judges listen to and that are really important. And then what we'll do as we go through this video, we're going to talk about these various aspects a little bit more in depth. The first thing that I would say that a judge is going to be aware of is what we call your time. And quite simply, it's going to be, at least in sections of the piece, are you keeping a steady beat? One question I often ask young students is, when they're coming to audition or they're starting lessons with me, how much do you use your metronome? What percentage of the time when you're practicing? And I'll get all kinds of numbers and say, oh, maybe 5%, maybe 0, maybe 10, 20, 30%. When I'm practicing, I've got pretty good sense of time, but I would say most of the time I'm practicing about 70% of the time I have the metronome going. And what the metronome is doing, it's helping me learn all the other parts of the piece that I am playing while I'm keeping steady time. So in other words, it's like doing something in the backyard of the house, but my front door is locked so that no burglars are going to come in and steal my stuff. It's the kind of thing where I'm keeping a very steady pulse while I'm working with dynamics, while I'm doing with shaping things, while I'm working with articulations. So there's a lot of variables, but the time in a particular section of the piece should be a constant. That's number one. Number two, of course, is your sound. You want to sound good. You want to sound like trumpet should sound. You want to be using lots of breath support to support your sound. So your time, your sound is important. Number three, and this is very, very important. Do you know what's written on the page? For instance, I'm taking a look at the Etude right now. And the first page of the Etude says Allegretto. Do you know what that means? You might want to look it up. I mean, the way that I look at Allegretto, it's like Allegro, which Allegro means lively, and Allegretto is a little lively. So there's a certain amount of life to the piece. I see in the second line, meno mosso. What does that mean? Meno mosso means less motion. So when you play it, and when you audition with it, there should be less motion. Go on the second page, it says slower. Make sure you play it slower. And then the next line after that, it says agitato. Well, it's a lot like our English word agitated. So what I think of, okay, we're stirring it up. We're kind of like pushing the tempo a little bit more. That's my interpretation of it. And then it says a little bit later, before we come to the conclusion, or at least to the double bar, it says rallentando. That means be pulling back from the tempo, slowing down a little bit. Then it says a tempo. It's in tempo again, then it says retard. So in other words, be aware that those marks are in the part and that you play them, you make them obvious. Don't just kind of like meld it together. Well, I don't want to make sure I'm going too fast. It's better to exaggerate. Did you hear what I said? It's always better to exaggerate everything that's on the page. The only thing that you don't exaggerate is your sense of steady time. that does not get exaggerated. But as far as your dynamics, as far as your accents, as far as the amount of rallentando, as far as the amount of accelerando, you exaggerate everything. Okay, number 4, and of course this is obvious, isn't it? Note accuracy. You want to make sure you're playing the right notes. We got accidentals, we got flats and sharps. We got some technical things to kind of worry about. Probably in the performances that you'll hear, they may not be absolutely crystal clear perfect, but hopefully they're close enough. But the issue is, are you getting some personality? Which brings me to the next part. In the solo, in the fantasy, for instance, in the Arbin, have you gone to YouTube, for instance, and listened to a recording of the piece with piano? That's really, really important. Because if you're playing, you're doing things in the piece, you're interpreting things or taking breaths or doing, putting your own spin on the piece, if it's something that wouldn't work with the piano, be careful, because the listener or the judge who's listening to you play this without a piano may be hearing the piano in their head and might be saying, well, you can't, that person never listened to the piece, he doesn't know how the whole piece goes. And so it's important to listen to a couple of good performances of this with piano so that you know kind of what you're doing with it. Okay, and the last thing that I would say that's really, really important is, what are you doing, and this goes along with exaggeration, to make this unique? Is your presentation of this etude, of this, the Arbin solo, that kind of thing, what makes you, even if you played it perfectly, what makes your performance of it stand out from others and makes it memorable? The best auditions that I hear are not necessarily the most perfect auditions. The best auditions are the ones that I can go back and say, and let's say I heard a person a couple of hours ago and I've heard all these trumpets. I mean, sometimes all-state auditions you hear 60 trumpet players and playing their thing. But I could think, well, remember that girl who played at 10, she was like the 10 o'clock hour. She really had a gorgeous sound, and she did that wonderful thing with a line. That's something that I write down on my sheet. That's just kind of like, yeah, that's one I remember. Because she may have missed the high note or something like that, but there was so much music going on. And by music, I mean expression, dynamics, louds and softs, the rallentandos, following all the details in the part. Those are the things that are most important. So let's talk a little bit about the etude, this collection of etudes from the Small. If you don't own the book, it's worth having, it's worth buying. I would suggest that you actually get it. Because I've used these for years, and they're, in the word etude, they're called etudes. That's a French word which means they're studies. They're a study in something. So most of the time when you play an etude, it means it's sort of specializing or focusing in on certain aspects of your technique or certain aspects of musical that are consistent across the board. So let's look at this. We talked about this. Allegretto means a little lively. Has a kind of a light. It's kind of a very much of a dance-like a mood. I think the suggested tempo would say quarter note equals 74 to 80, perhaps. At least that's what I read. It probably should have said the dotted quarter note because this is 6/8. I am choosing, for the purposes of our time here, to play it a little bit slower. And the reason why is because I think more people will be able to play it more accurately. And I'm not a fan of necessarily flying through things. Just because you can play it at 80 doesn't make you a hero if you don't play it well, if you don't play it musically. So I'm a fan of slowing things down a little bit more so you get all of the details into your part, and you play it accurately, you play it with style, and you lock it in. So for instance, I'm going to put my metronome right now on the clavinova. This is at about 60, metronome dotted quarter equals about 69. This is about where I record it. Now you can go a little bit faster than this, but be aware that I spent most of my time practicing this piece and getting this ready here with the metronome going in a variety of tempos, this being one of them. mosso means it's meno mosso. So I want to sort of have an idea about how much slower it is. So my choice might be to take it around, let's say around 60 compared to like 69, and then I took it down to about 60, which would be about here. So that's, you know, comparatively slower. So the other thing, when I see a change of tempo, it says meno mosso, means less motion, but I'm actually thinking, and you'll hear that on the other recording when I record the whole etude, is I try to change the style too. It's not just plain slide. So for instance, if I just go slower, I'll start on the second half of that first phrase. Doesn't make sense, but if it's going do you hear how we get, what I'm doing is I'm getting a bit more lyrical at that particular point. In other words, it's more like a song. The key changes, where there's a modulation there, it goes to a new key. Goes to sort of suggests F major, where the overall piece is in D minor in this part. So I try to make a difference, and then when it says the up tempo, for instance, the bottom line of your first page, it sort of ends lyrically, but then when the up tempo comes back, I think you can hear that I put the style back where it was. Make a true difference. And then on your second page, of course, it does say slower. It says piano, which is soft. It says dolce. It says sweetly. Okay, that's an invitation to do something really different and really unique. And this, for you, the person who's doing the audition, this is your opportunity to show your style, show perhaps your musical heart. So for instance, here's just shortly before the slower. So where the most of the pieces, I'm thinking of it being in two, like a 1 and 2, and here I'm actually thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yum and 2 da da dum. So those are the kinds of things that you want to be thinking about a lot as you're putting this together. So all of the things that that I said up front about the details of your sound, the details of time. Are you sticking with it, a tempo, and are you staying with it? That's more important than how fast you go. It's possible for you to go, but you're chipping notes. Chipping notes doesn't bode well, because then it sounds like you're hot dogging. And in an audition, that's not a time to do that. An audition is a time to demonstrate your musicianship, and that's really, really important. let's talk next about some details in the Arban Fantasy Brillante. When you have a few moments, you should look up J.B. Arban, who's kind of like the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of trumpet playing. For him, it was perhaps called cornet playing because it was he would have played on a cornet, which was still a reasonably new invention at the time. Just a couple of decades after it was invented. He being French, it was called a cornet à piston, or a horn with pistons, or a small horn with pistons. And while a cornet has a little bit more of a conical board, has a little bit warmer sound, it was still a B-flat instrument, just like most of you are probably playing a B-flat trumpet, like I am here. First thing, before I do anything else with a piece, is I look at everything that's written here. Now, for this audition, all that you guys are preparing is the introduction. So, I look at the beginning, and it says, introduction, so that's obviously clear. You have some piano cues there in your first line. And it says, Allegro, maestoso. Allegro means lively. Maestoso, what does that mean? Majestic. So I have a certain image in my mind. Regardless of what I've heard in recordings, I have a certain image. Majestic means it's going to be lively, but it's not going to be fast and, furious. It has to be dee-ya-da-da-dum, ya-da-da-dee-dum. So it's going to be moving along, but within the realms of reality, we just want to make sure it feels like, the maestoso, the majestic part, you're in charge. You want musically for that to be really, really dynamic. Then a couple of other little details. Again, this is something that I would practice with a metronome. And then perhaps if you listen to a couple of good recordings, I don't mean just, one of your peers, but listen to a quality professional recording of this, see what they do. There's a few tempo changes that would be okay, but you'll notice that those tempo changes generally go by section. In other words, the tempo is pretty consistent, and then when we change the section, then it's all a little bit slower, and it's all a little bit faster. It doesn't kind of go like this according to how hard the piece is. That's not, good musicianship. So look at the end of your second line. The tendency will be to not play that as a 16th, and perhaps play it as an 8th note. For instance, the first line, or the second line, I should say, of the piece. That was an 8th note, and so that would be incorrect. It's So, as soon as I get to Dolce, I'm playing it pretty much the same tempo, but you'll notice that I'm playing it much more sweetly. I'm playing it with a much more legato sound. Again, the amount of contrast that you put in your performance, combined with the accuracy, is going to make you noticed. I mean, that's the whole point. You want to get noticed for good things that you're doing, and perhaps doing some things that maybe are particularly special, that are really, really great, that show that you have some great musical ideas. We look at the end of the third line. It says con spirito, means with spirit. So that probably means that your sound, it comes back up to mezzo forte, then maybe it's a little bit faster. Again, the maybe part is okay because you have options. Con spirito doesn't specifically say go from this speed to this speed. It means play with some spirit, you kind of liven things up a little bit. Maybe that's in your sound, maybe it's a little bit in your tempo, but it should be obvious. Please make everything obvious so that if I were sitting down and taking dictation and hearing you play, I would write when you got to a particular measure that you did something special there that reflected the indications that are on the part. And you'll notice that on the Arban Fantasy, there's a lot of things that are written there that are important, and a lot of details. Every single one of them should be noticeable. Like in line number 5, it says, rallentando y diminuendo. Are you getting slower and are you getting softer? You're coming out of a forte. And then it says piano dolce. The a tempo is probably going back to about the tempo that you were when you started the piece. That's generally what a tempo will mean. And sometimes I've heard it as tradition. In the next line, you'll see where it says, right in the middle of your page, it says pianissimo with crescendo poco a poco. Sometimes it's tradition to play that line a little bit with an accelerando as you're getting to the forte, that kind of thing. Just as long as what you're doing is sensible and it's not based on your ability to play it, and also on the experience of having heard some good recordings. And then it says più mosso. Well, più mosso means, in the Etude we had meno mosso. Meno comes from the same English word as minus, or to take something away, was less motion. Here, più is more motion. So you should be a little bit faster. It doesn't have to be ridiculously faster, but it needs to show, okay, you're moving along. And then the come prima, you see 2 lines later, this is again the prima as in prime. It's going back to what it was towards the beginning. So it's probably just a little bit slower once again. So all of those things are really, really important. Last thing I'm going to say about the Fantasy Brillante, when we're going through this, is the little bit of a cadenza at the end. And you'll notice, let me play the pickup to the last 2 lines on your first page. And let me talk about what I'm doing. Play it perfectly, but you get the idea. Look at the little grace notes after the long fermata on the high G. Mr. Arbin could have written them as 32nd notes. He could have written them as 8th notes, but he wrote them as 16th notes, which means they should resemble 16th notes, even though there's some flexibility. So, for instance, one good way to practice something like that is to also practice it in time. In other words, don't let your interpretation of the cadenza be gauged upon your ability to play it. Like, oh, this is the hard part, I'm going to slow down. You should learn it this way. So for instance, if I were learning this for the first time, I would probably practice it this way. And I'll just show you in real time. Be able to play it that way. Now, I've never performed it that way, but I've shown you the ability for me to play it like that. So I can tamper with the tempo here. In a cadenza, it's now, the time can be a variable. But remember that because they're written as kind of grace note, or like 16th notes in the cadenza passage here, that the ultimate tempo, if you average it all out, should kind of resemble 16th notes. So once again, let me play that section for you, just to give you an idea of how it should sound. I got a little bit softer at the end, so I was not following the details as well as I should have. It ends forte. But there is another detail. Did you notice how after the high G, all the A flats there have accents. All right, well that time I tried to do something like I articulated them, maybe I elongated them a little bit, but I tried to do something to show that, yeah, I noticed that there's something special about each of those A flats. So let me play that one more time, and with that in mind, because I'm kind of learning it with you, and this is, again, this is how I approach it, how I learn it, and this is how I want to prepare something for an audition so that I get noticed for noticing the details. I'm going to play that last from the same place again, and but now because I noticed that it's supposed to end forte, I won't get softer at the end. I will keep it strong and end that way. So something like that. Before we finish up this little tutorial video, let's talk about scales. Do not set the matter of scales aside. I've heard some wonderful people play some wonderful auditions. They played a solo great, they played etudes great, and then they tripped up on when they played some of their scales. They had problems with remembering notes, they didn't sound good, whatever. They thought that was just kind of like a secondary type of a thing that really didn't matter. It matters. So make sure you're totally on top of your scales and that you just go in and you can pin the stuff to the wall. It says here major scales through 4 sharps and 4 flats, and then it says in parentheses concert F, G, A flat, B flat, 2 octaves. That's a little bit confusing when it talks about, you know, it says major scales. Are those concert scales or not concert scales? I'm going to assume they're not. Talk with your band director so that you really know what that is. But I suggest you just, if you need to, write them out exactly the way you're going to practice them. Don't just kind of like with a wing and a prayer, just kind of like, oh, you know, have some false starts and whatever. Have a pattern and have a way of practicing it. So for instance, I'm just going to kind of go through what we call the circle of fifths. don't need to talk about exactly what that means, but this is what it would sound like. This is how you should be able to play your scales. So it says metronome equals 120, it says quarter note on the tonic, and I'm just going to play, these are trumpet keys, C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat. That's taking me from 0 to 4 flats. Completing things, so I'm going to go from 4 sharps to 3 sharps to 2 sharps to 1 sharp. E major. Finishing up with G major. Okay, then it says chromatic scale, low C to high C, back down to low F sharp, and then back up to low C. I'm going to assume, I'm going to make the assumption I can just play those maybe like eighth notes. So something about like this. Something about like that. Well, let's finish up our session here just by summarizing some of the things that we have talked about. One of the things that I mentioned that's very, very important is your sound. And we talked about time issues, we talked about playing with accuracy, playing with the details. But one of the things about your sound, make sure, and this isn't something that develops overnight, but you're going to learn the sound, what is a good sound on your trumpet, very much the way you learned how to speak English, assuming English is your first language, from your parents. You heard it, you imitated it, and then from there, your speech developed as you continued comparing to what you heard your parents or your friends do, and your sound, or your sound of your speech, your accent. You sound like you're from West Virginia, you're from New York, California, whatever, for whatever your roots are. The same with trumpet playing. You have to listen to great playing. So, assuming that all of you are from West Virginia, because this is West Virginia All-State, among the places that you should go is come hear the Wheeling Symphony play. Go hear the West Virginia Symphony down in Charleston. Go up, if you're in the northern part of the state, go hear the Pittsburgh Symphony play. You want to hear things live. There's something about hearing live trumpet playing that deeply informs your sense of what you're doing. That's what I did when I was a kid. My parents took me to symphony concerts. I learned what the sound of a trumpet should be long before I ever played the instrument. Now I've been playing the trumpet again for probably about 60 years now. So that's a long, long time that I've been kind of playing one of these things, and played lots and lots of concerts, but listened to lots and lots of concerts and lots of great recordings. You want to listen listen, listen, listen. That's what you want to do. So, in preparation for these things, for this audition, remember, your time is important. Practice almost always with your metronome. Number 2, listen. You can still pick up some things about what is a good sound, what is vibrato, how loud is loud. When in doubt, exaggerate everything. If it says play louder, play louder. If it says play softer, play really, really soft. There are no extremes that are too great, especially for you as a younger player. Exaggerate everything. That's how you get noticed. But even if you're over the top, a conductor is happy to hear someone who can exaggerate, because they can always say, not quite as loud. I know it's marked forte, but you don't have to give me quite that much. That's fine. That's perfectly good. Practice accuracy. If you're practicing passages, break things down into smaller chunks and go over and over and over them. And don't just think by repeating it 100 times. You know, everybody knows the definition of insanity. That means you just keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. No, you have to claim it and say, what am I going to do differently so I don't miss that note again? Maybe you're going to circle it or do something like that. So accuracy is very, very important. On the solo piece, listen to it with piano. That's going to inform you a lot. On tempos, it's going to inform you a lot on how much you can do. How much faster, how much slower should it be, that kind of stuff. And then do things like, but that exaggeration are going to make your performance unique. So, I wish you the best, and have a wonderful audition, and I hope if you do make the group, it's going to be a great experience. It's worth working out the details for. I think it's going to be a great experience. So, I hope you enjoyed the video, and the best of luck to all of you. Take care. Bye-bye.